The myths of art history teach humans the way to live and triumph. They connect us to the beyond and revive in us the power to see a higher world. This episode is a true part of art history.
The child who was never supposed to become king. Horus. Okay, before we get to Horus, let's rewind the story for a second to episode 3. Remember Osiris, the good king who was tricked by his own brother Set, murdered, dismembered, and then brought back long enough for Isis to do what may be one of the most extraordinary deeds in Egyptian mythology. She conceived a child. That child was Horus. Now here's something really interesting. Horus wasn't born in a royal palace. He didn't grow up with servants or armies or golden halls. In fact, according to the oldest religious traditions of Egypt, Isis had to hide him. Absolutely, because Set, the same god who killed Osiris, now he was after the baby. Think about it for a moment. Imagine being born, and before you could even walk, Egypt's most dangerous god already wants you dead. This is how Horus begins his story. According to Egyptian religious texts, Isis fled to the swamps of the Nile Delta. No great temples we visit today, no pyramids, just endless wetlands, papyrus plants, birds, water, and silence. The Egyptians imagined that Isis was hiding there with little Horus, protecting him from snakes, wild animals, and from Set himself. Some magical texts even describe Isis calling on other gods for help whenever Horus fell ill or was bitten by poisonous creatures. In fact, the ancient Egyptians believed that these stories had real healing powers. Priests would sometimes tell stories of Horus's childhood to sick children, in the belief that just as Horus recovered, the child standing in front of them would also recover. Isn't that amazing? Yeah, a myth wasn't just something you listened to. It was something people believed could help someone heal. Now there's something else that people often miss. When we say Horus, we're actually talking about several closely related forms of the same god, and that confuses almost everyone at first. Child Horus, a little boy protected by Isis. Elder Horus, an older falcon god whose roots may even go back before the Osiris myth became popular. Then Horus of Edfu, the warrior king, and later, Ra-Horakhty. Yeah, Ra-Horakhty, where Horus is united with the sun god Ra. I know, guys, it seems confusing at first. But honestly, the Egyptians weren't trying to write a perfectly organized mythology. They were doing something much more interesting. They allowed different traditions from different cities, from different centuries, to coexist. No one felt the need to erase the older stories. They simply added new layers, something like an old tree that puts out new rings every year. The same tree, more history, more meaning. Now, what did Horus really look like? If you've ever walked through the Egyptian galleries of a museum, you probably recognized him immediately. A powerful human body with the head of a falcon, sharp eyes, a curved beak, broad shoulders, usually standing completely still, holding a staff-like staff, and the Ankh. Yeah, Ankh, symbol of life. Amazing. Sometimes he wears the white crown of Upper Egypt, sometimes the red crown of Lower Egypt, and often he wears both. This is called the double crown, and it wasn't just a decoration. It was a political statement carved into stone. It meant, I rule all of Egypt. Upper Egypt, Lower Egypt, a kingdom, a king, a Horus. In fact, this connection became so important that every living pharaoh was seen as an earthly manifestation of Horus himself, not just chosen by Horus, not just blessed by Horus, but the living king ruled as Horus. And when that king died, his role changed. He became identified with Osiris, while the next pharaoh became the new Horus. So every royal succession, every new king, in a way, it was the ancient story of Osiris and Horus happening again. History, myth, and politics, all woven together into one incredible idea. And honestly, that's one of the things I love most about ancient Egypt. Nothing is ever just one way. A god is never just a god. A king is never just a king. A crown is never just a crown. Everything. There's another layer waiting underneath. All right, last time, Osiris was gone, or at least everyone thought he was. Set had taken the throne. Osiris had become ruler of the underworld, and Egypt, well, Egypt had a problem. Who was supposed to rule the living now? See, in Egyptian mythology, kingship wasn't just about wearing a fancy crown. It wasn't just politics. It was part of the balance of the universe. The Egyptians had a word for that balance: Ma'at. Truth, justice, harmony. The natural order that kept the world from falling into chaos. And according to their stories, someone had to restore that balance. That someone was Horus. Before Horus was even born, his story had already become impossible. Remember Isis? After finding the scattered pieces of Osiris, she brought his body back together. Not forever, just long enough, through powerful magic, for Osiris to father a child. That child was Horus. Ancient Egyptian texts don't all tell this moment in exactly the same way. Some are poetic, some are symbolic, some leave parts unsaid. But across hundreds of years, the central idea stays remarkably consistent. Horus is born after death. He's literally the child of a father who no longer belongs to the world of the living. Think about how strange that is. Even today, that's one of the most unique birth stories in world mythology. But being born didn't make him safe. Actually, it made him the most hunted child in Egypt, because Set knew exactly who Horus was, the rightful heir. If Horus grew up, Set would lose everything. So Isis disappeared. Not forever. She hid. Ancient texts describe her escaping into the marshes of the Nile Delta. Picture endless wetlands, tall papyrus plants moving gently in the wind, birds everywhere, small islands surrounded by water. a place where someone could disappear, even from a god. The Egyptians loved this image. To them, the marshes represented protection, the beginning of new things. The marshes symbolized hope. Isis raised Horus there almost completely alone. And honestly, her story feels surprisingly human. Some ancient spells describe her searching for food, protecting her son from snakes, from scorpions, from disease, from dangerous animals, even from magical attacks sent by Set. One of the most famous magical texts from Egypt tells how Horus was once poisoned by a scorpion while still a child. Isis became desperate. She cried out for help. The gods listened, and according to the story, the sun god Ra himself stopped his journey across the sky until Horus was healed. Imagine that. The sunrise itself paused because one little child was in danger. Whether we read that literally or symbolically, the message is beautiful. The future king mattered so much that the entire universe waited for him. As Horus grew older, people began describing him in a very specific way. Not as a man, not exactly, but as a falcon, or a man with the head of a falcon. Now here's something really interesting. The falcon wasn't chosen because it looked cool. Falcons fly higher than almost any other bird. They see incredible distances. They dive with astonishing speed. To the Egyptians, that made them perfect symbols of kingship. A ruler should see everything, protect everything, strike quickly against enemies, and watch over the land from above. So when you see Horus with a falcon's head, every living pharaoh wasn't just protected by Horus. Officially, he was Horus. Yeah, that surprises a lot of people. When a new pharaoh came to the throne, one of his royal identities became the Horus name. This wasn't a nickname. It wasn't a title for decoration. It was a declaration. The king ruled Egypt as the earthly manifestation of Horus. Then after death, that same king became associated with Osiris. Think about that cycle. While alive, Horus. After death, Osiris. Then the next king became Horus again. Generation after generation, for nearly 3,000 years. It's honestly one of the longest-lasting political and religious ideas in human history. And if you look carefully at ancient statues, you'll sometimes notice something fascinating. A falcon standing right behind the king's head, almost touching him, almost wrapping its wings around him. That's Horus, not attacking, not dominating, protecting. It's one of my favorite details in Egyptian art because it's so quiet. There's another thing that surprises a lot of people. Horus wasn't only worshipped by kings. Ordinary people prayed to him too. They asked for protection, for healthy children, for justice, for victory, for safe travel. Some even wore tiny falcon amulets. Because Horus slowly became much more than the god of kings. He became a guardian, someone who watched from above, someone who saw dangers before humans did. Kind of comforting when you think about it. But, of course, Set wasn't going to give up the throne without a fight, not even close. And what happened next became one of the longest, strangest, and most symbolic rivalries in all of Egyptian mythology. Their conflict wasn't just one battle. Horus lost something that would become one of the most famous symbols in human history: his eye. Not forever, but long enough for that eye to become a symbol of healing, protection, and wholeness for thousands of years.
So, Horus eventually grew up, and when he did, he wanted only one thing: his father's throne. Not because he wanted power, because in the Egyptian mind, that throne already belonged to him. Osiris had been murdered. Set had taken the crown. As the son of Osiris, Horus believed it was his duty, not just his right, to restore order. But Set wasn't about to hand it over. And that's when one of the longest mythological conflicts in Egyptian history begins. What's fascinating is that ancient Egyptian texts don't describe this as one single battle. Instead, it's a series of contests, trials, magical duels, and even courtroom debates between the two gods. The fullest version survives in a text known today as The Contendings of Horus and Seth, written during the New Kingdom but preserving much older traditions. It's actually a surprisingly entertaining story. At times it feels serious and cosmic. A few pages later, it almost turns into dark comedy.
The gods don't simply fight with swords. They compete. They trick each other. They argue. They even ask other gods to vote on who deserves the throne. For the Egyptians, this wasn't just mythology. It reflected an important idea. Justice should come before force. Even the gods had to argue their case. One of their first contests involved boats. Now, this sounds strange at first. The gods were told to race across the Nile, but there was one condition. The boats had to be made entirely of stone. Set proudly carved a massive stone boat. It looked impressive until he pushed it into the river. It immediately sank. Oh, Horus, being a little more clever, built a wooden boat and simply covered it with plaster so it looked like stone. From a distance, everyone believed it was solid rock. It floated perfectly. Set was furious. According to the story, he transformed himself into a hippopotamus and attacked Horus's boat. If you're wondering why a hippopotamus, that's because in Egyptian symbolism, male hippos represented enormous destructive power. Farmers genuinely feared them. A single angry hippo could destroy fields, boats, and people. So Set becoming a hippopotamus wasn't random. It showed raw chaos crashing into order. But the most famous part of their struggle came later. During one violent battle, Set attacked Horus directly, and in the fight, Horus lost his left eye. Some versions say it was torn apart. Others say it was shattered into pieces. The exact details change depending on which ancient text you're reading, but every version agrees on one thing: the eye was badly damaged. And that changed everything, because this wasn't just an injury. The Egyptians saw eyes as symbols of light, awareness, and cosmic balance. The right eye was connected with the sun. The left eye, the one Horus lost, became connected with the moon. That's why later Egyptian priests explained the phases of the moon as the gradual healing of Horus's eye. A full moon represented the eye completely restored. As it faded, the eye appeared wounded again. It's one of the oldest attempts to connect mythology with something people could observe every month in the night sky. Eventually, the damaged eye was restored. In many traditions, it was Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, who magically healed it. That's why you'll often hear it called the Eye of Horus, or in Egyptian, the Wedjat Eye, which literally means the sound one, the restored one, or the whole one. And honestly, that's a much deeper meaning than most people realize. It isn't famous because it's mysterious. It's famous because it represents something everyone hopes for: healing after loss, wholeness after being broken, order after chaos. Wow! That idea became so powerful that the Eye of Horus appeared almost everywhere in ancient Egypt. People painted it on coffins, carved it into temples, wore it as jewelry, placed it inside tombs. Sailors even painted eyes on boats, believing Horus would watch the river ahead and guide them safely. Amazing idea. Thousands of these amulets have been found by archaeologists, not only in royal tombs, but in ordinary homes and burials as well. That tells us something important. This wasn't a symbol reserved for kings. Almost anyone could wear the Eye of Horus and ask for its protection. So, after years of fighting, after all the tricks, the battles, and the loss of Horus's eye, the gods finally realized something. No matter how many contests they held, no matter how many times Horus and Set fought, Egypt still needed a king. So the case was brought before the divine court. You could almost think of it as the highest court in the universe, the Ennead, the council of the great gods. The term Ennead in ancient Egypt refers to a group of 9 gods, an important concept in ancient Egyptian religion. The most important of these was the Great Ennead of Heliopolis, which included the sun god Ra-Horakhty and 8 other gods. In ancient Egypt, the number 9 had symbolic significance and often represented abundance. While the Great Ennead is the best known, the term Ennead can also refer to other groups of ancient gods. But back to our story. The matter was brought before the council of the great gods. Different ancient texts describe the trial a little differently. Some say the sun god Ra wasn't convinced that Horus was ready. Others say several gods argued for Set, but one voice kept returning to the same simple idea: justice. Osiris had been murdered. His son was the rightful heir. Eventually, even Osiris himself, speaking from the underworld according to several texts, reminded the gods that order could never return while the murderer sat on the throne. And finally, After years of conflict, the judgment was made. The throne belonged to Horus. Set wasn't erased from Egyptian religion. That's an important detail. Many people imagine he became the devil of Egypt. He didn't. He remained a powerful god. He continued representing deserts, storms, foreign lands, violence, and untamed chaos. In fact, in some temples, Set even helps the sun god Ra fight the giant serpent Apophis every single night. So the Egyptians never believed chaos disappeared forever. They believed it had to be kept under control. That's a very different idea. Order doesn't destroy chaos, it simply keeps it in balance.
Now let's leave mythology for a moment and visit one of the most extraordinary temples ever built for Horus, the Temple of Edfu. If you ever travel along the Nile between Luxor and Aswan, you'll eventually reach the city of Edfu. And standing there, almost unbelievably well preserved, is the largest temple ever dedicated to Horus. Construction began during the reign of Ptolemy III, around 237 BC, and continued for nearly 2 centuries before it was completed. That makes it much younger than the pyramids, but because Egypt's dry climate buried much of it beneath sand for centuries, it survived in remarkable condition. Walking through Edfu today feels almost like stepping into ancient Egypt itself. The walls are still covered with enormous carvings. Columns still rise toward the sky, and many of the inscriptions are still readable. For Egyptologists, it's one of the greatest surviving libraries carved into stone. The walls don't simply decorate the temple, they tell stories. One of the most famous is the great battle between Horus and Set. You'll see Horus represented as a falcon, striking down the forces of chaos. Sometimes Set appears as a hippopotamus, sometimes as another dangerous animal. The scenes are dramatic, but they aren't celebrating violence. They're celebrating something much bigger: the victory of order over chaos. My friends, please support us by subscribing for future stories about art history. Sleep well, and I'll see you beside the Nile again.